is that it has an archetype. And the archetype is, and God knows why, the circus. DMT is the archetype of the circus. So you give it to someone who is not psychedelically sophisticated, and you give them a low dose. Then they come back. Then you say, what was it like? This is a direct quote from a woman a couple of years ago. She said, it was the saddest carnival I've ever been to. She said, all the rides were closed. Nobody was there. There were just gum wrappers blowing between boarded up tents. That's interesting. So then give it to someone else, and they said it was full of clowns. And I said, you mean elves? They said, no, just clowns. And as the dose rises, the familiarity of the image is stripped away, and it migrates more and more toward this thing behind the mask. Well, now, if you think of the circus, it is an interesting archetype. First of all, 3 rings in constant activity. And it's a wonderful thing for children. Children love the circus because there's light and color and music and animals and, clowns. But then there's also a side to it which children don't see. I mean, you lift your eyes from the center ring, and there is Eros in the form of the beautiful blonde woman in the tiny spangled costume who works without nets hanging by her teeth far above the center ring. And twisted into this erotic image is death, because she works without nets. The whole point of her performance is the fact that she could fall and be killed. Well, then there's yet another aspect to this circus archetype, which is away from the lady in the spangled costume and the clowns climbing out of their little cars and the powdered elephants of many colors, are the sideshows that snake off into the darkness. The 2-headed lady, the goat boy, and the thing in the bottle. They're all there, too, to be looked at. So it's this incredibly rich amalgam of light, color, humor, childhood memories, cotton candy, joy, Eros, death, the thing in the bottle, the wild animals, so forth and so on. And as you make your way toward it, different layers fall away.
Similar but different consistencies with LSD and with psilocybin, if you could make it clear as the consistency that you find with DMT.
Oh yeah, I think that one of the great confusions about psychedelics is that they're all the same. Like in some textbooks, if you look up psilocybin, it will say a hallucinogen derived from fungi which causes LSD-type hallucinations. This is nonsense. This just simply means that LSD arrived first on the workbench of Western civilization, so everything is referenced back to it. If you're going to take these things, you need to take enough that you can tell the difference. And at low doses, all psychedelics are the same. It's just the experience of agitation and psychic inner turmoil, sort of like speed, But as the doses increase, you begin to hit the bifurcation point, and these things have distinct personalities. For instance, DMT, the elf playroom reception area, that seems to define it. The amazing thing about psilocybin and its distinguishing characteristic is it speaks. It speaks in English to you. It conversationally approaches you, and you talk to it in your mind. I mean, this is an amazing thing. If you've never experienced it, there's something out there for you. Try it.
That's what was behind asking you that question, because I don't have any DMT experience. I've taken psilocybin just in the form of the mushrooms themselves, in a botanical garden, and I don't have much other experience. And what happened was quite transformational in the long term. You could put me in touch with the plant, but not even, I didn't close my eyes. I had no other room. It was the room that was there in the garden. a communication, well, you said it last night, with the mind of that mechanical area. The mind of that plant world that was there. It talked to me, I got translated into English. It was kind of saying everybody should have very close to them a realm like this to be in. And people would be okay. Do everything you can to support that.
That's the message. And for instance, the mushroom has a personality. And like all personalities, it excludes some things and includes others. The mushroom personality is a radically eccentric personality. The mushroom talks about transforming the planet. It says, I come from a distant part of the galaxy. I have 500 million years of galactic history in my databank. I have seen 50,000 worlds come into existence and pass out of existence. I've seen ships the size of Australia depart for Andromeda. I've seen this, I've seen that. It's willing to show you the newsreels of it. That's kind of and it says, your world is ending. Put your furry paw into my hand, and together we will march out to the stars. It's this Well, so then you take a compound or a shamanic hallucinogen like ayahuasca. Chemically, this is very, very similar to you. Experientially, it could hardly be more different. Ayahuasca does not show you images of enormous machines in orbit around alien planets and that sort of thing. Ayahuasca, first of all, it doesn't speak. It shows. You become like the eye of a camera, flying through a world. And what it shows you is much more feminine. It shows you water flowing over the land. It shows you plant life growing and dying. It shows you the movement of glaciers over the surface of the land. It shows you people burying their dead. It shows you archaic civilization. It shows you women nursing their children. It shows you meat. It shows you the stuff of this world on every level. And it moves you to tears. I mean, it's emotive. It's not about our cosmic destiny out there in the starry blackness. It's about coming to terms with the earth and our past and each other. And you say, these things, these are personalities, these are visions. And the idea is to fuse all of this into a single unitary perception that does honor to all and limits none. That's it.
Communicate with all types of plant life, and they see that each plant life has a beautiful message. And they did talk about the mushrooms and saying that it does enhance the human immune system. Talk a little about that.
Well, yes, this is true. You probably all know or may have heard of what's called reishi-gen or Ganoderma lucidum. This is a mushroom, a Chinese mushroom, that definitely stimulates the immune system, and many fungi probably have this quality because these higher fungi, the Pschedelic, have enough of a trace of their evolutionary depth to more primitive fungi, the kind that cause candida and vaginal fungus and stuff like that, the undifferentiated fungi, that the immune system recognizes this as a potential stimulant and responds to it. So this is definitely true. Yeah.
I just got this notion that maybe the good old incompleteness there would explain the absence of the self when we dive into it. Maybe a quick answer for a very long answer about which is more real than the self and the other, or is the self the other? The one?
No, the self is the other. That's what I've come away. The self is the other. And assimilating the implications of that takes a lifetime. We have within us the very thing that we're speaking, know? It's like the Jungian fairy tale of the guy who leaves home and searches the world for enlightenment and has all these adventures and finally concludes that it is not to be found and returns to his home and rebuilds the heart and discovers beneath the heart the thing that he has sought in all the wrong places. I mean, it is within. It is a recurso. What we are looking for is within us. It's our own inner riches. This is why psychedelics are such a powerful antidote to capitalism, because they teach you that you are not a wannabe. You are where it's at. And nobody should allow you or sell you a different point of view to make you think you're going to be complete when you get a Maserati or a Rembrandt or something like that. All that is just the detritus of the physical world.
They were cycling at the same rate between self and other? There is such a thing?
Well, I think that if we could really follow ourselves into dreaming every evening with full consciousness, that we would discover that we touch the philosopher's stone at least once every 24 hours. It's just that we return down the river of forgetting, let's say, and every morning we emerge from spending time with the other as self, and then we're inserted back into the fiction of our three-dimensional existence and our individuality. Don't forget your question. We'll come back and hammer on this a little more.
Psychedelic explorer, or
realizing we are not the telephone or the tree or the person we live with. And so for those people who are having trouble establishing and maintaining balance, this is the last thing I think they should get. Where it's so unfamiliar that the question comes up, have I done it this time? You know, am I dying or am I in danger? The answer is the odds are incredibly against you being seriously in danger. People don't die from psychedelics unless they have heart conditions or some incredibly rare medical condition. The problem is that the ego feels threatened by the boundary dissolution, and its ace is your self-identification with it, and it can actually say to you, you are dying, and here's the evidence, and you have to say, no, it's unlikely. This is really tough. I mean, this is, the Buddhists talk about slaying the ego. This is slaying the ego. You must slay it, otherwise it will spread panic into your whole psychological system. Will give way to panic and hysteria. So, unless there is some real reason to think you're dying, and you should have done your homework, you should know what to expect. For example, if you take LSD and begin intense bouts of vomiting, this is not a proper reaction to LSD. Something is wrong, either with the LSD or with your relationship to it. You should know what because a typical trip will put you through changes, but is not dangerous. But if you suddenly begin exhibiting some symptoms, heart fibrillation, or something like that, then you want to know. This is why then there's always the issue of the buddy system. Should there be somebody else there? What about all that? My position is if you're anxious, then you should have a sitter. If you're going to do it alone, you should certainly tell someone so that they can check on you. I don't like doing it with groups or with sitters because inevitably I get spun into them. What I want to do is go as deep as possible and be it. And even if I'm alone with one other person, culture is the third guest at the table. You start, I've often found myself in the middle of psychedelic trips thinking, I'm sure glad there's nobody else here to see this, because I'm sure it would alarm an observer, because I have my leg thrown back up over my neck and I'm screaming in Urdu or something. But it's okay. After a few minutes, it's okay. But if there were an observer, they would feel the need to do something, And often, like I've seen people smoking DMT, and people moan, and they say, no, and they moan, and so then, you get them back together and constituted, and you say, how was it? And you say, it was fantastic. So you realize, how they present is not reliable.
Well, I've heard it. This is also said about the Maya. It was said even about the dinosaurs, which doesn't mean it can't happen. I don't know if I believe it ever has happened. Obviously, I believe in principle it can happen. I believe, it has always seemed to me that this used to be the motivation for my LSD taking. It seemed to me that you could sit down in a room with someone and begin to, this is maybe what I'm trying to do with you, but we never get there. Sit down in a room with someone and begin to have a conversation that would take it apart. Take it apart and leave nothing there. At the end, no guru, no method, no teacher, and no nothing else either. I think that the world is held together by a misunderstanding, and that if you could overcome that misunderstanding, it would just hold up and deconstruct, and that in a sense this is what the concept of enlightenment. I think it's a series of insights or thoughts or revelations, one which projects forward into another, which leads you to say, oh, it's not this, and it's not that, and it's not this, and then, yeah. Well, I guess the mundane plane is the misunderstanding. And I guess then if we analyze the mundane plane, we see what constitutes the misunderstanding. A belief in three-dimensional space and time, a belief in the finite life of the organism, and then the rupture of the mundane plane leads to this kind of platonic superspace where there seems then to rest incontrovertible truths. They are not truths approached by logic and argument. They are self-evidently true. So they're either true for you or they're not true. And shamanism then sort of views all this very optimistically, takes the existence of this transmundane world as a higher world, a world in which healing can be done and the community can be made to cohere. And the shaman is essentially a technician, wiring and repairing and moving behind the board of culture, keeping all these lines open and together. Is that where your interest lies? Well, yes, I see. So apparently, it seems to me that it looks like mind is something that, if we were to make an analogy, it's somewhat like sulfur, in that sulfur has this weird quality of having two melting points. You have solid yellow sulfur and you heat it and it melts. But then you keep heating it and it turns back into a solid. And you continue heating it and it melts again. This is a curious property of sulfur, but not magical. The human mind seems to me to be like that. It's something that in the mundane plane, it has collapsed down into a tool for threat detection and social account keeping, basically. But when you go alone or with your nearest and dearest to wilderness or places where you feel secure and you perturb the chemical foundations of consciousness, then this is the equivalent of heating the sulfur, and lo and behold, a new geometry is cast out of the fluid mercury of the psychedelicized mind. And I think I said this morning, I really favor a geometric model. I think that the shaman's power comes from the fact that the shamans really are seeing things from a higher dimensional perspective. But that's not a metaphor or an analogy, but that's the voice of mathematics speaking. And because as I analyze the history of biology and higher animals and culture and so forth, what I see as a continuous theme from the very beginning is the conquest of dimensionality. Life conquers dimensions. Life begins as a fixed slime in one place with no eyes, no ears, no nothing, and it evolves tactile awareness. Then it slowly becomes, through the sequestering of pigment-sensitive cells onto its surface, it acquires the notion of a gradient of light and darkness. And then, through the formation of lenses, it's able to stabilize an impression of the exterior world. It evolves progressively with more advanced forms of locomotion. Eventually it evolves memory and complex cognitive interior maps for anticipating the future. This is a description of a strategy for the conquest of dimensionality. And I think really the shamans are the people among us who represent the next evolutionary level. They're people who have learned to do what we can't do, to come and go from hyperspace, whatever it is, an informational superspace that exists inside the psychology of the individual and the group that we can't even see because we're materialists, fixated on the topological surfaces of the three-dimensional manifold, which is only one level in the onion of reality. These shamans have moved over to another level, but I think they are the paradigm for a new authentication of the human experience. And it's all about experience. This is what we clearly have wandered too far from. We are too in our heads. The consequences of a phonetic alphabet, monotheism, modern science, Greek aesthetics, yada, 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 is just to move us too far from experience. And so then this compensating thing is coming back in, and the shaman is the paradigmatic figure. And when you analyze what shamanism is, psychedelic experience is revealed to be the sine qua non of this lifestyle. I've fiddled with screenplays. My objection to most visions of extraterrestrials is people don't understand. Extraterrestrials are not mundane. You know, they don't want our beautiful women, and they don't have a fascination with our gross industrial output. The real trick with an extraterrestrial is to know when you're in the presence of one, because it is going to be so strange and of such a different order of magnitude in many parameters that the trick is recognition, I think. I mean, eventually we may come to see that many life forms that we are not all to be traced back to one blob of germplasm, that, you know, the warm pond theory. I think the warm pond theory is in for serious revision. I think interesting genes have blown in here every once in a while over the millennia as the Earth has ground forward, and of course those genes get embedded in living systems. The mitochondria, which power the animal cell, were originally free-swimming bacteria that got into a symbiotic relationship with some kind of membrane-like matrix, and before they knew it, they had been incorporated as subcellular organelles of a larger system. Mind that this doesn't happen to you. Yeah. Well, isn't it? It's the role of the artist. It's to stretch the envelope. It's to bring the news from the edge. I mean, the musician, the shaman, the smith, the physician, these were all originally combined, you know, because the mystery of creation and the mystery of the human body, this was all spun together. That's why when people say, you know, what is the proper response to the culture crisis? I think the response is to shamanize. And that means, you know, to help with the healing, to explore the invisible world, and to make art, to try to make art. to try and anticipate the revelatory process by which the transcendental other is drawing the historical matrix into an ever clearer reflection of its identity, whatever it is. I mean, it's going to come through us somehow. We invoke it. We're boring toward it through the mountain of human history. It's boring toward us. We can anticipate it. It's sensuous. This is a real relationship here, but it's a relationship where illusion is shared and shared and shared about what the other is. Well, it's not clear, as I say, it's not clear what the intent is. After all, what we now take to be the great canon of Western art were basically a fairly self-indulgent bunch of courtly types spiraling around producing public relations flattery for royal families. There are different ways of looking at the artistic enterprise in each time and place. Well, I maintain history is a self-limiting process, and that you can see the end from here. You know, you have to have a pretty complicated rap to deny that we are in some kind of unusual situation here, folks. Well, that suggests to me that this is awfully close to the surface of ordinary metabolism, considering what a shocking shift of consciousness it is. I mean, millions of people go to the grave without ever having a DMT trip unless they have it at the brink of the grave. That we don't know about. But the idea that in a dream such a shockingly extreme physiological response could be elicited means I'll bet if we could do human work with DMT unfettered in an environment of biofeedback and that sort of thing, that you could teach people to have this experience. Well, that may be what it's all about. It is, you know, a non-invasive, non-drug technique for just opening up a portion of your brain that somehow cultural abuse has closed off to us, and that if we could access it, that would be the dream time, and that would be the entry into the domain outside of history. It's yet the Seth material. Well, I used to say if you can do this without drugs, you're probably mentally ill. I tend to take a hard view of it. I don't exactly understand the razzmatazz that surrounds it. I mean, I've talked with many entities. I've never felt the need to establish the spelling of their English name, or, you know, this wish to name the entity puzzles me, or whatever. But I didn't then write a book and go on Offray and say that I was channeling Dorothy and that the world should pay attention. It seems to me a curious relationship to your own mental life that you would say you were a channeler. I mean, it's just, these are the things we think, and it's a way of casting it. For instance, it never occurs to me, or it doesn't seem to me a very interesting question to say of the mushroom, is it the same person each time? I mean, what a joke. It's some kind of enormous intellectual agency. It's not a human being. That's the thing. The channeling, I guess my take on channeling is, and it will come out maybe tonight when we talk about the time wave, is that the real skinny is that you have a connection to everybody who ever lived. And there's a way of tuning your internal machinery in such a way that, you know, here comes Marie Antoinette, or here comes Beethoven. But it isn't that Beethoven is a relative. It's simply that they're all there in some cultural superspace and can be reached and called down. I mean, they're an idea. Beethoven is an idea. You know, his grumpiness, the hands behind the back, the da-da-da-da, we know Beethoven. And so he lives in some kind of superspace. And I think people are just much too literal. I have this trouble with channeling and with flying saucer people and with the fans of Great Atlantis and the people who believe that, you know, lantern-jawed Neanderthal visages 10 miles high are gracing the deserts of Mars. All of this, the attraction of this kind of thing completely puzzles me because it's so hokey. And if you want the real thing, you know, it's just 5 dry grams away. The real thing. I mean, so that, you know, you will have done with anecdotes by the denizens of trailer camps in Florida about, or all of this other stuff. I mean, it's not that the woo-woo isn't out there. It's that it's so much more woo-woo than the beady-eyed peddlers of it assume that they just have no idea what they're playing with. The New Age generally, I find, somewhat obnoxious because it's a flight from the psychedelic experience. I mean, what you can safely say about the New Age is if a technique doesn't work, they'll proclaim it. And it's certain, and I'm very much in favor of anything which breaks down the conceptions of ordinary medical practice. That's the most important part of the New Age. The attack on the medical fascism of the hierarchy. But people confuse science with reason and think that if you're anti-science, then you're somehow just permitted to go bananas. No. You can be anti-science, but nobody gets released from stuff like the rules of evidence. You have to make sense. Your position, whatever it is, just can't be sky blue. And you should then expect to be treated with the same respect as somebody who's gotten themselves epistemologically together and ontologically oriented. I mean, there are flaky ideas in this world, and that people associate me with the New Age because that was the only place where I was originally tolerated. But I really want my ideas to be tested in the ordinary way, by the ordinary method. I mean, I offer a mathematical formalism and then surrounding that a bunch of arm-waving verbal exegesis. The core thing is the mathematical algorithm to be tested by the ordinary rules of evidence and falsification. You can read Karl Popper to figure out what all that's about. I love science. I just think it's incredibly pretentious and it claims too much. Its methods are great. Its constipated conservatism is maddening because what it deals with is the most interesting thing there is, nature. Nature is very, very interesting, complex, and permits all kinds of radical speculation about what has happened. It's just that science is also a business, and also a priesthood, and also a men's club, and also the plaything of certain classes. So all that has to be overcome. My method, I suppose, if method is the word which I would share with you, since this question about the New Age came up, is not to embrace things which are simply outrage bourgeois sensibilities, but to explore edges, to test edges yourself. That's the important. Yourself. You don't learn about Tantra by reading about Tantra, or Ibogaine by reading about Ibogaine. You have to go and do these things. And what you will discover is, you will be fleeced a few times in your youth with this method, You'll get in with some flying saucer cult or some beady-eyed guru and his fanatical devotees, but eventually you'll learn the neighborhood, and you'll become street smart, and you won't be a mark. That's the goal of a real spiritual method, is to not be a mark. And then when you get that together, lo and behold, you would think this would lead to cynicism. Because you say, well, I went and I stayed with Babaji, and he was a jackass, and then, I joined the Unitarian, Uniformitarian, Unifunctionalists, and that was just a scam, and so forth and so on. You would think it would lead to cynicism, not if you keep to the edges, because eventually you're going to come to psychedelics. And then, lo and behold, jackpot! The real thing. Weirdness beyond all possibility to comprehend. You have just won the Publishers Clearing sweepstakes of peculiarity. Yeah. I had this happen in the 60s. I got into a place with LSD where I had this LSD, and I would give my friends one, and I would excuse myself, and I would take one, and then I would excuse myself to the bathroom and take 5 more. And then I would end up holding their hand all night long, and I felt weird about it. I felt like, where is all this stuff going? It's like it's not working. And when that happened to me, I just said it's time to dry out for a while. And I did, and then everything worked normally later. One of the weirdest things I've encountered is about 1 in 20 people don't react to DMT. And it looks genetic to me. I mean, I can't believe you could resist that. If it's coming at them the way it comes at me, nothing could stop it. And yet they will do it and take, enormous inhalations and then say, is this it? Or, I don't know, it's kind of strange, but it doesn't seem, and you're just like, oh my God, what is this? So, and one thing to bear in mind in all of this is that we talk a lot about the mental effects of drugs, but these drugs are tiny objects. They are molecules, and they won't work unless they find their way to your synaptic cleft and find waiting for them there what are called drug receptors. Think of them as little outlet holes into which the drug can plug itself. And how many of these little receptors you have is part of your genetic inheritance. And so some people have a lot, and some people have a little, and some people have some for some, and some have some for others. And you have to learn what works for you and what the right tool is. Yeah. Yes, toad is 5-methoxy-DMT. It's an exudate of Bufo alvarius, a large southwestern toad. No, it is not DMT. It's 5-methoxy-DMT, and it doesn't cause the same thing that DMT causes. It causes an intense, void-like emotion that is very dissolving, but it is not accompanied by the kind of visual activity that DMT. The visual activity on DMT is astonishing. I mean, it conveys you into a world more complex than the world we're living in, a world of brilliant colors and faceted surfaces. Yes, but on ayahuasca, unless it's really horrendously strong, you will never reach the kinds of places you reach on a DMT flash. Smoking it. No, there is nothing like that this side of the yawning grave, I hope. I mean, I don't know. Is everybody cognizant of what that's like, about how fast the world can be rearranged and how totally replaced it can be by something that you not only hadn't imagined until 30 seconds before that, you couldn't imagine. And now here it is. and you just gaze, you gape in slack-jawed disbelief at what has happened to reality. Oh no, it doesn't induce, somebody asked, is it dangerous? The danger with DMT is death by astonishment. This is an entirely possible outcome of your involvement with it, especially if you're intelligent. I think the more intelligent you are, the more at risk you are for death by astonishment, because you just say, good grief. Well, I'm pro-virtual reality just in the sense that I don't think it should be made illegal and stamped out. I think it should be a legitimate area of research. I certainly don't think most people should plan on decamping to virtual reality land for the rest of much of their lives. That wouldn't be a good idea. I see it primarily as a tool for studying language and communication. You never know where a technology is going to lead. When Edison invented the phonograph record, his sincere belief was that its major application would be in the making of wills. Because you would have an incontrovertible record of the person's voice speaking, and so it wouldn't be legally contestable in court. Well, I don't know if anybody has ever made a will on a phonograph record, It clearly had an entirely different use and application. So here we've arrived at Sunday morning. This is basically loose ends, complaints, resolution, that whole bit. So let's work our way into it, and then if need be, I'll harangue. So anybody have anything they want to, yeah. I like understanding. I think, Whitehead said that understanding is the apperception of patterns as such. That's all, as such. And so you can look at any situation and see different patterns. I mean, like in this room, if we were sociologists, we could analyze where the women are and where the men are. And that would be a pattern. We could talk about that. Then we could switch our field of interest and talk about where the men and women over 40 are and the men and women under 40, an entirely different pattern. Where the people wearing socks are and the barefoot people. And you realize that in any assemblage of objects, there's an infinite number of patterns of connection. And the more of them you see, the more you have this feeling which we call understanding. And it's a feeling of having assimilated the object to itself. And the great mysterious assemblage, the mother of all weird assemblages is history. The peregrinations of our species through time and the detritus of that journey. I have a friend in London who's a rare book dealer, and when I'm in London, I'm usually able to contrive a situation where he has to have some errand out. And so then I'm left alone for hours with the books inside these multiple concentric circles of security. And I can open up all the cases and pour through this stuff. And it's astonishing. I mean, the cul-de-sacs into which the human mind has wandered, phlogiston theory, the Chaldean oracles, the Wunderkammer, the hollow earth thing, and then all this literature of exploration. I mean, the stratigraphy of the human experience is maps and machines and diaries and blueprints, and out of all this, if there can be a pattern, then there's a kind of an epiphany, a kind of a sense of order, of it does make sense. It isn't simply a chaos. Well, that's that's a Hindu notion of this same thing, essentially. This platonic superdimension where all and everything is suspended in place. If you ever want to have a very bizarre sub-psychedelic experience when you're in Oxford, go to the Pitt Rivers Museum. Everybody goes to the Ashmolean, and of course you should. But on the kinkier side, the Pitt Rivers Museum, Pitt Rivers was an early ethnographer in England, and into one of those Victorian cast metal and glass ceiling buildings, he gathered hundreds of millions of objects classified by category. So, there are like 50,000 needles from all over the world in drawers, 10,000 pairs of pliers from all over the world, from all times and places, and on, and they're in drawers which you can open, and the stuff is stacked up 20 feet high, and you realize that it's a concentration of manas, it's a concrescence. There's one section where there are over 200 drawers labeled magical amulets, and you open these drawers and look, magical amulets, southern Iraq, magical amulets, Syria, and on and on. Very bizarre. That to me is, searching for pattern through the detritus of human history, because I really think that we are caught up in a relationship with something very, very mysterious. I don't like religious vocabularies, but an epiphany is taking place. Consciousness is really important, and it is using the stuff of biology to create some kind of new order in nature. And technology, I'm convinced, has something to do with it. That machines are more than they appear to be, and the machine as we have known it is to modern technology. It is to a possible technology what the chipped flint is to the technology that we possess today. In the concept of a machine, which is downloading of a function to matter, is a concept of immense profundity. Life may be able to extend its career by orders of magnitude through this means. And life is now seen to be, I think, really central in the evolution of and the career of the universe. Most stars gutter out of existence after 500, 600 million years. That's the average lifetime of a star. We happen to be on a planet around an extraordinarily slow-burning and smooth-burning star that has lasted a long time. But life on this planet has been here for at least 2 billion years. That's 3 times the life of the average star. Biology is persistent. Biology is a major player. And biology is not entropic. A star, no matter how smooth burning and self-sustaining, is on a downward energy curve toward heat death and extinction. Biology, on the other hand, it pumps itself to higher and higher levels of complexity, faster and faster. And it uses the dying stars as stepping stones from one to another. The way, for instance, in the Hawaiian Islands, there's 30 million years of evolution visible, but no island out there has been above water more than 6 million years. The islands keep slipping beneath the sea and rising at the western edge of the complex, and the life keeps stepping from island to island and perpetuating itself. Hans Moravec has done calculations of the kinds of computational simulations that could be carried out if you had a computer where every atom was a switch and the computer was the size of the solar system. With a computer of that size, you could resurrect every DNA sequence that has ever existed on this planet. And he feels that you would feel a moral obligation so to do, and that the resurrection of the dead would become a social project pursued with government funding. Yeah. Well, I don't think Rupert would agree that biology is entropic. The way biology works is by being what's called an open system far from equilibrium. You see, a closed system, like a star or a fire, will always drift toward equilibrium, which is entropic. But the miracle of biology is that by taking in matter, by being an open system and allowing matter to come into the system, and then breaking down that matter and extracting energy from it, the biological organism achieves the miracle of evading equilibrium. It hovers off the main curve of equilibrium. So people who talk about the third... What?